Hi, my name is Alicia Hossein, and this is my Calm 101 Persuasive speech with my fake audience because we're on quarantine, and my 4 cards. So Gladys Caron, who is actually the director of Family and Child Services for the state of New York, said that we could send juveniles to Harvard for what we pay to incarcerate them. I think that's pretty sad when we'll spend $200,000 of taxpayer money sending kids to prison versus rehabilitation or treatment. This system is not equipped for the proper treatment of juveniles. Therefore, we should not be transferring these kids into the adult court system. I've seen kids in my community as young as 14 years old being certified as adults at a very alarming rate. These kids will then sit in our detention centers with no bail before they're even convicted of a crime. I've also spoken with numerous peers of mine who, at teenage years, were sent to prison, and the residual effects it's had on their lives. So to better understand this, we'll first describe the juvenile justice system and the purpose that it was put in place for. Next, we'll go ahead and examine how juveniles are treated in the adult system. And last but not least, we'll discuss how we can actually still hold these juveniles accountable for their actions and keep them out of our adult court systems. Rachel Garber of Cedarville University writes, should the primary goal of juvenile justice be to protect the community from juvenile criminals? Or should it be to help juvenile criminals become law-abiding individuals who will contribute to society? Well, juvenile justice system was put in place for just that. Community supervision and guidance of these juvenile delinquents, early detection of their delinquency so we can treat it at an early age. The first court system was put in place in 1899 in Cook County, Illinois, but not until 1974, where the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act was passed, that these states actually got the funding that they need to implement these programs. These programs are very important because behind every single one of these child are underlying factors that contribute to this delinquency. Usually categorized in 4 risk categories: individual, family, peer, and community. These are kids that grow up in dysfunctional or abusive homes, neighborhoods that are high on crime, poverty, as well as heavy gang influence. Some of these kids come from homelessness and are merely acting on survival as well. A lot of people say, well, even so, they should know right from wrong. Well, we'll bring some facts into this. It is a fact that our brain as human beings is not fully developed until our early 20s, meaning they may know right from wrong, but they're still not fully developed. The last part of our brain to develop is our frontal lobe, and that's the part that controls impulse, decision making, and risk assessment, among other things. Stated by Powers in his book of Cruel and Unusual Punishment, he states that adolescents generally forced to rely on the emotional centers of the brain rather than undeveloped frontal regions, thereby functioning more so on impulse than strategic decision making. Juveniles are less culpable than adults when assessing situations and making decisions, but this also means that they're more amenable to rehabilitation and treatment, especially if it's treated early on. So now that we know the purpose of the juvenile justice system, let's move on to the treatment of juveniles in the adult justice system. So when juveniles are transferred over into our adult justice system, not only do they lack the knowledge of the due process of the court system, which leads to them usually waiving important rights, but they are also sentenced mandatory minimums when the crime implies that. The judges are not allowed to make discretional sentencing depending on the age of the juvenile or the background. So these kids are 12 years old and could be facing 25-year sentencing. Also, when these kids are sentenced to adult prisons and facilities, some states house them with adult criminals, meaning at their most vulnerable developmental ages, they're only surrounded by adult criminals, subject to abuse from inmates, guards, sexually and physically. Also, there's no education programs for them or mental health programs or even anything to really teach them any developmental or life skills, meaning transitioning once they get out of these adult prisons and try and transition into society, they're often reoffending because they're institutionalized. We need to have early intervention that prevent these high-risk youths from engaging in repeat criminal offenses. This can save the public nearly $5.7 million over the lifetime. And this is a fact from New Evidence of Monetary Value of Saving of High-Risk Youth, written by Mark Cohen. So now that we see how they're treated, we will go ahead and see how we can go ahead and still hold them accountable for their actions and just treat them in the juvenile justice system. So the juvenile justice system has numerous detention centers that we should definitely utilize more. These detention centers usually hold juveniles that are there for status offenses like truancy or stealing, shoplifting, minor things. We need to have community supervision for those kids and actually get them out of these detention centers and reserve these spots for kids that actually need the treatment and the supervision to better rehabilitate. These kids need help majority of the time, and us as a community should be able to evaluate and try that first before sending them to prison. Things that we can do are evidence-based programs like functional family therapy, multi-systemic therapy, etc. Also, we need to work with these schools, focusing on education and the punishment of children in school by school and not calling the police. In my conclusion here today, nobody wants to be given up on. So please take the time and effort it takes to nurture and guide these kids before we say that they're beyond fixing. These offenders, no matter how serious the crime, first and foremost are children and should be treated as such. You can go to change.org today and sign the petition for the U.S. Senate for juvenile justice reform that will remove these kids from being transferred to our adult court system. Thank you.